I know, aren't you surprised, Mike? Mike, I need a way to get a hold of you so I can send you the link privately if you want. I'm gonna make it open, but I'm gonna do the reading first and maybe say something I want to say, if anybody even comes. I mean, usually nobody comes, so. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna go through chapter by chapter, and then I'll probably make notes and then go back and commentate on it. I'm still studying it. There's so much to learn. It's like the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. Um, I want to try to understand the different views better. It's hard though, because I do think I largely have the right. At this point, I feel like I largely have the right model because I see. I've really tried to. I mean, bias is it's a hard thing, but I do think, if I'm honest, I do think the historicist view is by far the best view. But that still leaves the door open potentially for other parts of other views. Like your view, I think is interesting and possible. I have a little bit of an issue with the 3.5 years being down to one. Not so much because that one verse might not be there, but it's just nobody's said that historically, so it's like hard to swallow. I need to like really see the evidence for that. It seems like um, it's contrived, but I don't know enough. But that's just like my first thought. Like if I'm totally honest about it, that doesn't mean that's the case. Um, I mean, obviously, I'm biased to some degree because I grew up learning this other view, but it just seems so coherent with. But at least, like your view has this Jesus being, although it puts the 70th week in the future, at least it's like acknowledging that Jesus is in the 70 weeks. I guess I think I have a real problem with anybody who's putting him outside of the 70 weeks because I think you got to at least say Jesus inaugurated the new covenant. I'm not clear on how you look at that. Do you say Jesus didn't? Hey Nadimos, what's up, man? I will open the room eventually here for the topic. I'm gonna read the chapter. I'll probably end up reading more than one chapter, but essentially, I'd have a hard time without some really good evidence accepting any view that tries to suggest that Jesus didn't at least inaugurate the new covenant from Jeremiah 31. Like, it's one thing to say to put him outside of the 70 weeks in not, if you break up the time, which I think is a mistake already, almost certainly. Detaching the 70th week, there's nothing there to tell you to do that. I look at it like a probationary period for Israel. It's the 70 years of captivity. They're all through the Old Testament. They're captive, and they're put on probationary periods. They never take off a week. I mean, yeah, you can make a case if the 70th week's detached because God's got to do it through Israel or something. But it's like, just because those breaks are not meant to say that, like, for instance, the 70th week is a break because it's separating the 70th week to like make it to have it draw out or to be noticed. Now, the 49 years at the beginning are another story because no one knows for sure what exactly that's about. I would just suggest it's to indicate that these are cycles of 7 and Jubilee. I know, like, Jonathan Kahn, when he wrote The Harbingers, which I found pretty interesting, he says 2001 was a Shemitah cycle year. And, like, he's shown a lot of interesting things about that 7-year cycle. Well, guess what? 2001 goes back and aligns with the Shemitah years of the 457 decree year and the year Jesus' baptism to 3.5 years after his death. That would have been the end of the 70th week, and it would be aligned with that. So he figures that, although I don't know how he squares that, but I did the math, like triple checked it, and that would be an alignment with that. And that's where he claims a lot of interesting historical events happen. Now, that could be just contrived, but it just is one more thing that fits with it. He's coming at it from a totally different angle. It fits with the birth thing, with the September 11, 3 BC, and the star alignment, which I should have looked at that video. It shows Of course, this isn't a contention between our views, but it shows that it fits very well with Jesus being 33 and a half. It fits with Tiberius's 15th year, whatever it is, of reigning. If you understand that he was co-regent for his first 2 years over Judea, it puts that to line up with the 27 AD baptism. It puts Jesus, when it says he's about 30 in the text, that shows that the divergence from the about 30 would only be with 6 months one way or the other, but he'd still be about 30. That is, he could be 29 over 29 and a half or under 30, 30 and a half. So you don't have to like think they were being really. It's too bad he wasn't 31 or something, because then it would almost certainly force you to take the view that when they say about that age, they mean less than a year off from that age. It's like the spring fall issue with the calendars, from how they were keeping track of time. But with the star of Bethlehem and the sign in Revelation 12, it fits perfectly with the 27 AD. Although that would, from my view, that would put his death in 31 AD, which no one believes. That everybody believes it's either 30 or 33, but we don't know for sure. And I feel pretty confident about this, that we don't know for sure the days of the week for any given year. They're speculative, but that's based on assumptions. We don't know how they were starting the years and the months for sure before 200 AD. Is what I've kind of concluded. People claim they know based off NASA, Noah's, astronomical stuff or whatever from the government, but that's just, they don't know how to line that up. And then you go to any of the official Jewish reckonings and they just presume it's the same as they're doing it now, of course, but they don't actually know for sure. There's no historical record to show like before 200 AD or whatever how they were doing it. And there's a big controversy over the reckoning of the new moon or whatever. I know you know about that. I don't know that much about it, but I know that it's not clear according to the best scholarship I could find. I should probably get references for that. But that's what I concluded from just kind of doing a bunch of research and reading good sources. I didn't save them per se, or maybe I did. I'd have to dig them out though. I do have a file for calendar issues. Anyway, maybe you're not even there anymore listening to what I'm saying, but that's where I'm at. We know how they reckon years. They were lunisolar years. I think it is appropriate to know the potential times to start the clock of Jesus' ministry. That's the other problem with the people who turn it into 360-day years. There is no 360-day year in their actual reality. It fluctuates with the adjustments. It's never 360 days a year in real life. But yet we know they were keeping track of the clock in such a way, it's a lunisolar calendar, so that the calendar would not deviate more than so many days, like 10 or 11 days in a given year, so that the festivals would fall in the proper seasons every year. The concept is counting years. So doing the day conversion is just a big waste of time. It's a big mistake. God made it easier, and that's how they did it. We know that's how they counted time. So we know they're actual years. We know they had Shemitah years that are based off real years. So that's how they would have counted times. And it says in Luke 3 that the people were expectant. They thought John the Baptist was the Messiah. They weren't sure. How would that be if they weren't? Maybe they didn't know what the decree was for sure either. Maybe they thought it was Darius. Maybe they thought it was Cyrus. And so they probably were counting years how they would. And maybe they were expectant the appropriate amount of years after Darius's decree. Some of them probably were. And then Cyrus or whatever. And then now comes that third decree. It's in their scrolls. And then they're expecting at that time. That seems normal to me. But we know in the New Testament text they were expectant when right up. And that's part of the narrative of Jesus' baptism when he's anointed. And any view, besides that issue with the days being counted, where people try to convert the years to days and all that is just a big mistake. We know that they, I scared them off already. Hey, Danny. We know that they were expectant, and any view that makes the starting of the Messiah's ministry, riding into
riding into the city 3 days before he dies, I think that's a mistake too. Because obviously his teaching and his ministry, where he's anointed, becomes the anointed one, the christened one, the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one, is when he's anointed by the Holy Spirit and God speaks from heaven. And he insists that John do this to fulfill all righteousness. He's saying, and then the disciples knew when he was, the Holy Ghost descended on him like a dove. It keeps telling you that, and then it tells you, and then the disciples knew that this was the Messiah, because he went into the desert for 40 days and then came back and read the scroll. Today, the acceptable year of the Lord. And he reads the Isaiah scroll. It's like, come on, this is like what the writer is trying to tell you. This is the one, the bringer of the new covenant, as far as I can tell. If you go that route, you'll see it. If you write down what he would accomplish, what needed to be accomplished in the 70 weeks, you'll see the New Testament writers going to great lengths to say it so. All right, so anyways, no one's here, so I'm going to just start reading Daniel 1. And then I'm going to open the room for anybody who wants to talk about it. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spoke unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, and that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding in science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah Shadrach, and to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. So they're like vegetarian or something. They don't want to eat unclean stuff. So he consented to them in this matter and proved them 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine, and that they should drink, and gave them pulse. I think that's like vegetables or whatever. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill and all learning and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. The king communed with them, and among them all found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the 1st year of King Cyrus. Let's see. Who's still there? I'm here, Sucka. You want to talk about it? I'll put the link in there if you're interested in coming in. I did have it scheduled for later, so maybe
Um, I might read the second chapter too, but I think maybe we'll see if you want to come in. That's cool. I've chatted with you. I think in some other channels. I know that. If you want to just jabber about why you think this is nothing to get excited over the book of Daniel, that'd be interesting too. I was hoping to get some other Christians that had other wrong views of Daniel that are so popular that I could argue with, but I'd love to argue with you or talk to you about it. I'm being kind of joking, but let's see. I'll be nice. And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled and his sleep brake from him. This is interesting because this is the chapter where Daniel interprets the dream, and you get a really good context to what's going on with the prophetic parts of Daniel. I would contend that hey Hillary, what's up, man? Oh, okay. Yeah, you can jump in if you want to. If you guys want to talk about this at all, anybody's welcome to join. I'm probably just gonna stop there, but I'll leave it open for a minute. See if you guys want to join. Anybody? I wouldn't mind talking to both you guys. It'd be nice. Hear what you have to say about it, what you've heard about it, if you have. I'm sure other people will eventually join if we start chatting. I don't have a very good reading voice.
Hey, buddy.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, you're welcome.
What are your thoughts on this? I would suspect that you have some thoughts on the idea about Daniel being prophetic, right?
Right. So, let me actually be as charitable as possible for the stream, and I will put my previous Christian hat on. And one of the things that you said early on in the stream about dating the 70 weeks prophecy
Yeah.
means a lot to me, because I was taught and firm in doing the whole conversion math, right? Like of converting the lunar to solar years to show the veracity of the prophecy in Daniel 9.
Yeah, I believe that's false. It's very
Really?
It's very popular, and it sounds good at first, because they claim it like goes right to the day when he rides in on the donkey.
Well, no, I didn't even make that claim though. It was more about the year, like the precision of, like, giving the year precision was enough, but not down to the day.
Yeah, there are multiple ways. I can pull up let's see here. I think it real quick. I can pull up.
I remember you and like Kelvin, gosh, this was a couple streams ago, I think,
Did you
talking
catch
about
that?
a little bit. Yeah. Did you see that I made this like amusing clip? I think you had fallen asleep or something, or like
Oh,
let your stream keep going.
yeah.
And that one guy came in and was talking about like that lust was like demons that were like
Oh, I didn't
sensating
catch
your scrotum or whatever.
that. Is that what I called it? I said no. That's a bat wing or something. Maybe I can't remember. I always
No, I'll send you the clip sometime
Okay,
in your
yeah,
email. It's so funny. I'm like, no, not to rag on like you or your channel or anything, but Kelv was just so great. He was just like, well, what about like oxytocin? Like, couldn't it just be that?
Was he arguing with my friend that's like Mike Banner or whatever, the guy who's like yeah, he's like a Hebrew roots. So like
Oh, okay.
he's like I'm like in between evangelicals, right? And then his view, kind of, you could say.
he's funny because most Christians will kind of like presume I'm a Judaizer, like and throw me in a basket with the Hebrew, the Hebrew roots type. And then the Hebrew
Sure.
roots will just consider me as just another retarded Christian. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic to be in between, like I'm
That's
like,
really
well,
funny.
the 10 Commandments are still valid at least, right? Like, maybe the food laws, like, and whatever, and then it's all kind of valid, like just in principle, but like I don't keep the feast or whatever. And and that they actually agree both that the old covenant is just it's all or nothing sort of thing. And I would say, well, it's not. I think, yeah, I know the Jews called it the whole thing was like moral to them in a sense, right? Anything God
Hmm.
says is what you should do, and like I agree with that. But like there is distinctions in the text. Like the 10 Commandments are the Constitution. God writes them himself. They go in the Ark of the Covenant. He writes them with his own finger and speaks them to the children of Israel.
Right.
And there's all sorts of typology regarding that. So it's like, and then everything flows from that, the other laws, and some were added and because of sins and things like that were shadows of
Hmm.
Christ. So I don't think you can call that on the same level as like the Big Ten or whatever, but that's a whole another conversation, obviously.
Sure, sure, sure. So
But
what?
yeah, go ahead.
Anyway, um, we were on about dating, the 70 weeks prophecy. And why is there a can of baby food?
Oh, I don't know, just messing around. Chicken baby food is just kind of like it was a joke.
I mean, babies will eat anything. So,
Yeah. Well, I like make fun of people because I'll say like, "Oh, that doctrine's just titty milk." Like it's kind of like a metaphor for
titty
my,
milk.
it's like it's not real food. It's like for
Yeah,
babies
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
thing. And so being a chicken and then also baby food, I thought was funny. I don't know why that was up there now, but
yeah.
it's one of my avatars. So,
I mean, I still kind of love it, so it's fine.
yeah.
I'm not mad about it.
So yeah, so I think it's pretty much undeniable that the time is we know they used a Looney solar calendar that is from month to month. Yes, it was a lunar calendar based on 360-day years with 12 months of 30 days. But it's also just kind of logically obvious that to keep the seasons in time with actual seasonal change, which they did, there's got to be adjustments, right? So is what they do and have always done, even back in Daniel's day, I guess. I mean, presumably, even if there's no evidence for it, and I'm not even sure on that, but I think
Hmm.
there's quite a bit of evidence. But even if there wasn't, their festivals were seasonal, so the we know they still do it today. It's like a 19-year cycle, and 12 or 7 or I forget. I'd slipped my mind, but it's 12 and 7, right? So I believe 7 of the months get a 13th month. It's like Adar 2. They add a second Adar for that year, and that keeps it adjusted. I forget. It's like 1 month has 12 to split up the 12 or the 12 and 7 of the 19-year cycle. It's probably something like 1 year has 13, and then 2 have 12, and then a 13, and then a 12, and then a 13, and then 2 12s, and then
Oh
a
my
13.
gosh.
It all kind of lines up in a nice 2 1 1 1 2 1 sort of thing, and then that keeps it seasonal, and it only fluctuates like up to like I think 11 days change for a festival, right? One way or the other, it kind of bounces back and forth on our calendar, but that keeps it in the season. It never goes further than that when they do that, and it's actually very accurate that way too. According
Hmm.
to it's even in a weird way, like the dates fluctuate on our calendar, but it is actually quite accurate. Um, so, in other words, when you do that Daniel 70 weeks, right? You count actual years, just real solar years,
Hmm.
because of that. Because it does fluctuate, but they didn't actually keep a 360-day year. It's
Interesting.
kept month to month, 30-day months, but they'd have to wait for a new moon, right? So because the days are only like 29.5. So you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
I guess, yeah.
Because when it says 70 weeks and everybody understands that to be years, and you can justify that very well, like in many ways. Like there's verses that literally say it, and so I actually take. It's very interesting. It was completely the Protestant understanding as a day for a year period. Whenever dealing with prophetic time periods in Daniel, where
Hmm.
it uses a purely lunar, just a lunar
calendar. Essentially, like the 1260 days, all those increments are clearly based off a 360-day year, but there never is an actual year when they do the thing I just described, where it actually has 360 days in an actual year. So in my mind, that says these years, that's a good sign that these are not meant to be taken as literal days. And of course, yeah, any comments on that? If you're following me at all?
To an extent, yeah. I
I
guess.
could open.
So here's my thing,
Yeah, go ahead.
and how I would have tried to defend this, because I was someone who was trying to actively convert people through a teaching like that to show the veracity of the prophecy of Daniel 9. And I would be confidently asserting through this kind of mathematical approach from the decree to rebuild in Nehemiah, I believe, excuse me, to rebuild the temple, that would point us to belief in Jesus, and everyone listening to me giving such a teaching ought to believe in Jesus because he's fulfilling this very distinct prophecy down to the very year. And I guess how I see it now, stepping away from it, is that it's an anachronistic understanding of how people did month and year counting, and how they were willing to just introduce fudge factors into their lives and say, oh, that we recognize that the seasons are changing now, so we're going to shift a couple days, right? We're going to allow that this is still this year, but we're going to move these days over. That sounds like what I'm hearing from you, is that they recognize that their system wasn't complete or completely accurate to what they were trying to do with their daily lives, so they had like a fudge factor to it. Is that kind of...
Well, no, it's. I would argue that I would. I'm so. This is what frustrates me about it, is because I feel like the standard view that people are using to, and there's a historical kind of thing before this. I'll try not to get off on these huge rabbit trails to explain it,
Okay.
but as far as the years go, where you're counting years, it's
Mhm.
actually kind of impressive to realize how they actually would count years, and it's not like it's not anachronistic. It's like this is literally how they kept their.
No. I'm saying the counter interpretation would be anachronistic, saying like that there was this dichotomy between um,
Oh, I
lunar
see.
counters and solar counters, and so we're justified in making the conversion because we
Oh,
now
I see.
count.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Um. So yeah, that's another whole interesting scholarly mystery, really, about why they were using a 360-day year calendar. Because there's evidence that. So I've heard from like Heiser and reading from a highly acclaimed other scholar or whatever. That's not really not like trying to prove a biblical point per se about any particular fundamentalist view or anything, but just that there's this interesting thing noted in the scholarship of all the ancient countries. Like they all were using a 360-year calendar, and many of them, like it almost seemed like they all suddenly at the same time realized it didn't work any, or like tried to change it to actually fit the seasons, as if something. And I'm not going to appeal to anything per se of like what would have changed it, but there is like evidence that they all had a 360-year calendar. And I think the whole way that corresponds to the 12 zodiac, and just how it fits nicely within like a sexaminal or whatever you call it, 60 base system, and how that
I,
fits so nicely with 360 degrees, right? It's kind of like,
Interesting.
oh, that's obvious though why they did it that way. But
Hmm.
they all seem to be trying to use an actual 360-year calendar, and they seemed very capable of measuring the stars, and like seem to have the knowledge, even like the Maya and other countries or other, civilizations, like, and then they all suddenly like at the same time seem to kind of realize it wasn't working, as if almost like it was before. Maybe it's
Hmm.
weird. I don't know if you've heard about that, but
I have not. That's interesting.
yeah. And so like, I suspect it had something did happen that caused the change. And most of these scholars are I've heard talking about it, or Heiser was talking about it. He's you know, an old earther or whatever. So he isn't going to have the same answer I do. But it was interesting to hear it from them, because then it's like, they're not being doing bad scholarship. Not that everybody does that's young Earth creationist, but you know what I mean. It's the mainstream kind of thought on it, and people writing about it. That's what made it interesting to me. It's not simply like, oh, like it seems like that falls short to just say, oh, they like to circle and 360 degrees is perfect, and the zodiac thing. It's just a mystery, I guess. Apparently, I should
Right.
read more about it, but
Hmm.
so I just take it as like perhaps the 360-day calendar was literally a year at some point in my worldview, but I don't really care. But I take it now as to be like when it gives these time periods, because of their cycling 19-year cycle thing, it never actually has 360 days in a year. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to keep it seasonal. Their festivals in season, because that depended on that. And so, like in Revelation, where it lines up with Daniel, like Daniel 7 and Revelation 13, you see these same symbolic beasts that represent the kingdoms. And Revelation 11:12, right before that, it has the time times and half a time, which is like 1, 2, and then 0.5, which is 3.5. And then it calls it 3.5 years. It calls it 42 months. And it calls it 1,260 days, which would be 3 years at 360 days a year. But there are no years that are, when the prophecy is written and the way they're adjusting their calendar, there is no years that actually have 360 days per year, not even on average. It fluctuates like from 353 to like 360 something, and then back down again with that cycle of 19 years, adding the month every 7th month, or 7 out of 12 months.
Right.
And so if you look at the math, you realize there are no 3.5-year periods with 1,260 days. And so, whenever you see these numbers like 1,260 in Daniel, it's in the prophetic, or the what do you call it, apocalyptic style literature, which is all symbolic.
Sure.
Like, everything's a
Yeah.
symbol. So, like, why wouldn't the numbers be?
Mm-hmm.
So, a day for a year. There's several verses that suggest that, and so it's just taking that principle and being consistent with it, and then apply. And then that's the other thing is when you look at Daniel 2, which is what I want to talk about when I do that, is like, it's setting this up as the statue, and it's the kingdoms one after the other. And so when you see the Revelations, at least partially is supposed to, you can see where it connects up with Daniel, like, and then tells more detail. And it just doesn't make sense to think nothing happened and it's all crammed in at the end. But when you understand that it's a day for a year, you realize these are like historic events in the church age, if you want to call it the church age. I'm not a dispensationalist, but these are like major events that you can line up with the way it's laying out the successive kingdoms. It's really interesting, and people have largely abandoned that for like a futurist view or like a preterist view, and I think that's largely because of the Great Disappointment, the whole 1844 thing, where they thought the Christ was going to return, and then everybody kind of abandoned it, and like, I don't know, it gets into like conspiratorial type
I
thinking.
mean, for me, it wasn't so much the great disappointment in my church and Christian circle. It was more that we wanted people to view Old Testament prophecy as something to look forward to in the undeterminate future.
Yeah, no, I just meant like historically for
Yeah.
Protestant church at large. Like it
Huh.
used to be that they all understood it the way I'm talking about it, a day for a year, and that's what spurned on that Great Disappointment, because they thought that 2,300 days being years would, in the sanctuary, would be cleansed, would be Christ returning to the earth, Miller said, or whatever. And then
Right.
yeah, so but yeah, I agree with you that I don't think I think there still is future events, but when you see how Daniel 7 and Revelation 13 are line up with the beast, and then it continues talking about the little horn or whatever, it's like it's much more powerful when you realize it's actually telling events through history, like the whole way, because it's the king. Because if you look at that Daniel 2, it says, he gets the vision when Cyrus is Nebuchadnezzar, right? He's the head, and then it's Medo-Persia is the next kingdom, and then the one that defeats that is Greece, and then it's Rome, right? And then it says
Mhm.
and then there's miry clay mixed with the iron, which represents Rome. And then it says the rock hits the statue at the feet, right? And that's described as Christ's second coming. Everybody agrees on that. And so it's saying, like, until the second coming, there's successive kingdoms. So there is no break in that, like, kind of setting that context. And so you got to, like, fill in the blank there, and that kind of sets that. Anyway, so if you don't make it a day for a year, it seems to me that it kind of wrecks that context. But I'm going to talk about that more later.
Sure.
Well, did you, in your view, how did you understand that 70th week?
Prophetic gap.
You put the gap in there?
The gap,
The
baby.
gap. I'm just totally sickened. No.
No,
I
man.
really think that's false. I do.
Oh
but
yeah. Like I think it's a completely inconsistent hermeneutic, but like that's just what we did in my previous fellowship and Christian Thought Circle to reconcile the differences and difficulty in resolving a block of text like that. We would look at like other prophecies, like in Isaiah and Ezekiel, in similar ways.
yeah, no, I think there's some points that can be made, and it's like, why is it broken up?
Yeah.
Right. But for me, it's like, this is the context. Like, 70 weeks are determined. So, like, that seems to me to be like time sensitive. Like, I'm going to tell you when the clock starts, and then
And this is when it ends.
70
Damn it.
weeks to accomplish this. It's like, if it's which week was it after the 69th? Not the 70th. Oh, what week is that? But so it's telling you these things have to take place, or I'm gonna, so he probably thought it meant like get the temple ready and then do it, and then they need to repent and all that, right? And through the temple, but it ends up being Christ. But perhaps they could have done it through the temple. It's kind of speculative, but like, I ask Christians, and it's like, you don't think Jesus brought in everlasting righteousness? Isn't that what we believe? Like, he made reconciliation for iniquity, like put an end to sins. Like, it's not that, it's like, no, Jesus didn't do that. We're still here sinning. And it's like, these people are like usually OSAS or whatever. And I'm just like, and they have problems with my view. And then I'm thinking, oh, I believe Jesus did this. And it's like, already, but not yet. But my main problem is so here, I'll test on you. Are you familiar with this thing where it says everybody agrees verse 26 here is Messiah is Jesus, right? So
wait, scroll down.
This way. That is that way you might. Which part do you want to see? Did you freeze? I can't hear you if you're there, but shout out from Twitterland to Nick D. Am I cut out? Maybe. Let's see. Am I frozen? I'm probably frozen. Hey, somebody put a 1 in the chat if you can hear me, because he seems frozen. You hear me? All right, that's good. Maybe I'll come back. Anybody's welcome to join if they want, but thanks, man. Appreciate that. Nitty froze. All right. So I'd love to hear anybody who was a Christian or isn't a Christian or what they know about Daniel. You're welcome to join. If you have any thoughts on any part of Daniel, it's cool. The stream's in the link there. The stream link is in the comments. I guess none of my Christian friends are going to come. But that's okay. They're probably busy being. Let's see. Oh, Bruce is streaming. What a jerk. Just joking. So the issue for me is after the 62 weeks, Messiah is cut off, but not for himself. Most people agree that that's after the 7
which has already happened before the 62, like in my chart here. There's 7 and then 62. So when it says after the 62, that's presumably the same thing as saying from the decree to 69, because the 7's happened. Messiah is cut off. Everybody agrees that's Jesus, but not for himself, colon. And people say, well, the prince of the people that shall come shall destroy the city. I actually don't think that's necessarily Rome, although that is historically what happened. But it's the people of the prince is the context could be read as being thy people and thy holy city, right? And the prince Messiah comes from the people. And so those are the only people that have been mentioned. So I actually think the people of the prince, because Messiah is called prince up here. See Messiah the prince. And it says shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, right? So Messiah the prince. So, and the only people are thy holy people. He's talking to Daniel, right? The Jewish people. And so when it says the people of the prince, the people are the holy people, and the prince, which obviously the King James translator thought that was not the same prince as Messiah, because they put a lowercase p instead of a capital P, but that's not in the original language. So I would actually argue that it was the Jewish people of Prince Messiah that's to come, because to Daniel, he's yet to come, right? That destroyed the city because they reject him and he's crucified. But I mean, who destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD? The Romans physically did. Titus and his soldiers, which Jesus predicted would happen. But why did God allow it? Did God do it? Did Rome do it? Or did the people of the prince do it? The Prince Messiah, because they rejected him. I would actually argue that's the more sensible view considering the context. But let's say it is Rome, because historically it was Rome. Although the ones that decided the fate of it were the Jewish people, I would argue. But let's just say it is. That's how we should read it. Rome and the prince is Titus, the Roman soldiers. So you read that. The subject of this verse is Messiah. And then it's colon, and then it tells you what happens as a result of him being cut off. Or you could say because he's cut off because of this, or you could read it a couple ways. Because the temple ends up getting destroyed outside of the 70 weeks. This is like what the culmination of him being cut off brings an end to the temple. But when you get to verse 27, and he shall confirm the covenant, who's the he? I think the way I understand it, even in the Hebrew, the referent has to be Messiah, because the subject of the people of the prince is plural. It's the people of the prince that shall come, destroy the city, not the prince himself. The subject is the people. That's a plural. This is a singular. So it's really problematic, or even impossible, if you want to think it's proper grammar, to say that he is this prince here, which I think is the Messiah anyway, but the subject is people, so that he would have to be, even if that was a singular, it would still be more likely that the he is this Messiah up here, because that's why there's like a colon here. But people tell me this is the Antichrist, because this he here refers to the prince, this prince. Well, we know the Antichrist comes from Rome, because that's the last kingdom. But if the he is Titus, that's still not the Antichrist, it's Titus. So even if I grant that this is Titus, and even if I grant that it's really sloppy grammar, that's not proper to say that he is the referent is the prince of the people, he's still not the Antichrist directly. You still have to extrapolate it to another layer to say, well, he's a type. No, the 69th week is over. We know reading here, the Messiah is cut off after the 69th week. And it's very clear it's after, not on or at the end of, it's after the 69th week is over. So it's after 69 weeks. Sometime after 69 weeks, he's cut off. So we don't know when, just that it's after that. And when we get down here, we're wondering what the heck. We've only got 69 weeks. The prophecy's for 70. Now this verse tells you for 1 week. It's the 70th week. He shall confirm the covenant. And in the middle of the week, he causes the sacrifice, and Jesus made the sacrifices of none effect. So why should I say there's a big break in time here when it says 70 weeks? How should I, the he is clearly the Messiah, proper grammar. Even if you want to make it this, it's not clear that this has to be Rome. We just look back and know it was Rome. But even if it was Rome, that's not the Antichrist in the future. That's Titus and the Roman army. And the he still refers to Messiah. But people want to say this is the Antichrist in the future that confirms the covenant. It's crazy. It's not right. It's unbelievable. It's ridiculous. You're saying this is the only time-sensitive prophecy that points to the Messiah coming in that time period. It's the only one. Yeah, you can just take the presumption that Jesus is the Messiah, but if you're from the scripture, this is critical. This is clearly what it means to say. There's nothing about the context of the 70 weeks about anything bad happening. It makes no sense to the people of Daniel's time or the people of in the first century where this ends up landing. Everybody agrees this whole thing's talking about Jesus. And then you're going to say he doesn't confirm the new covenant? If you cast this into the future, you're taking away this from confirming Christ as the Messiah. And by the way, he's cut off in the middle of the week, the 7 years, the week of years, exactly the middle of it. From his baptism, which is the beginning of his ministry, he's anointed by the Holy Spirit and God's speaking from heaven. That's the very beginning of the 70th week. And then he dies halfway through that week, 3.5 years later. And they continue preaching to the Jews for another 3.5 years. We don't have anything to confirm the dates, but it very much fits. And every Christian says, nope, this isn't Jesus. There is no verse that says he confirms the covenant. We're casting this into the future, and we're saying this is the Antichrist. Totally out of context, other than the fact that the abomination shall cause it to be desolate. Because that's talking about the temple. It was destroyed because of that. If you also look here, there's a parallel. Messiah, 26b, destruction of the temple in the city. 27a, the Messiah. 27b, destruction of the city and the temple. They do that in Hebrew writing. So it's a parallel, A, B, A, B. And there's actually bigger chiastic structures in this whole prophecy too. You can, to be Messiah and then some other prince and then some other prince and then destruction. It's not as, it doesn't flow nicely. Scholars will point out this kind of structures all over the Bible, and A, B makes way more sense. That's another just piece of evidence. Messiah, destruction of the city. It's like good, bad, A, B. Or like what the Messiah does, the city being destroyed. And then it's like the Messiah. And then you could also read this as stretching to the end of time. It's being kind of a parallel, but would be paralleling Jesus' second coming and his first coming, which is already, but not yet. And then what they thought there was just one coming of the Messiah, but there's really two. And that's the sense that he like fulfills his mission or whatever by bringing the new covenant, but also putting the end to history. So there's really, I just feel like if there's any way this could be a powerful prophecy, it's this understanding, but it's been largely abandoned for two views that didn't exist in Protestant thinking until basically the entirety of the Protestant world was opposing Rome and pointing out that the Pope and the system of the beast is the Antichrist comes out of the papal beast.
And they didn't probably like that very much, so they started a group called the Jesuits. And look, I'm not going to get too crazy with this, but it is just historical fact that the first two writers to invent a denial of the day for a year historicist view were Jesuits. Roberto Rivera and another one. They're both Jesuits, and they came up with the preterist view, the purely preterist. This is all past. There is no future to Revelation. And futurism, where it says all this stuff is future, making this really, really strained interpretation, taking it away from Jesus, making it the Antichrist, and casting it off into the future simply because it breaks up the time period of weeks of years. I think looking back, we should understand this week being separated because it's the week of the Messiah coming, dying, and the end of probation for the Jewish nation. There is no, that's the other thing. If he's cut off after the 69th week, then you're putting the Messiah confirming the new covenant outside of the 70-week periods, because if the 70th week hasn't started yet and there's a big time pause and Messiah is cut off after the 69th, that means he's not inside the 70 weeks, which means he didn't confirm the covenant for the Jews, which it says in Jeremiah 31 that he would bring the new covenant. That means Jesus didn't bring the new covenant. There is no covenant with the Gentiles. He confirmed the covenant in amongst his people, which is exactly what this says. The many. He was bruised for our transgressions. By his stripes we are healed. That was to the Jewish nation. That was the Jewish prophets giving prophecy to the Jewish nation, their scriptures. It's like we forget that. He's the Jewish Messiah. He did confirm a covenant with the Jewish people. They started the quote-unquote church. It wasn't Gentiles that started the church. It's a Jewish covenant. We get grafted into it if we're Christians that are Gentiles. There's no Gentile covenant. And people like just kind of, take on that Jesus is Messiah, and there's this church age, or he's done this new thing with the church. They know he didn't. Confirmed a covenant with his people. And you get grafted into it. This is so critical and so obvious. I just don't get it. People don't want to, they just won't accept the truth. I don't know what to say. I'm not the biased one. This is obviously what it says. And it's totally obscured by 95% of the Christian world. All Protestants understood it this way. Sad. Anyways, all right, no one else is coming in. I'll do chapter 2 maybe later tonight. If anybody wants to join or has any thoughts, love to hear from you. Peace out.